And I think a lot of it, you talked about staff not um, being afraid to ask questions and to say, I don't understand this, I don't understand this. I find it, especially in government work, that managers, that leaders have a hard time asking their staff, what is it I'm missing? What don't I know? And we know Catch Diagram says, the further you go up in leadership, the less you know about what's happening on the ground level. But especially what we found in government work, we both say this all the time, is the more that you rise up in service, the more you're supposed to just automatically know, like you're in the matrix and you get this thing plugged into the back of your head, and all of a sudden you know kung fu, right? When I've done many coaching sessions with folks that said, I just went from a staff manager, 2 to a 3, and they didn't give me any training. They just gave me extra responsibilities with all these new units that I've never worked with and said, well, you've been good as a manager here. You'll
Yeah.
be fine with these 10 other places that they've never worked. Right. And it's such a challenge. I ask people, do you have staff that are subject matter experts? And people, they think about it. It's funny to see them think about it and say, well, yeah, I guess they are. I would hope they would say, yeah, my staff, yeah, they're the bomb. They know everything. They know as much as I do, or they teach me stuff. How selfless and how healthy of an organization is that when, your leader can draw on the knowledge of your staff and complement each other. A rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, it's such a challenge. I mean, what are you seeing in that area?
Oh, it's just such a mix, right?
Yeah.
It's some people really want this for themselves, but they don't know how to communicate it. A lot of it comes down to, look, we have our craft, our subject matter expertise. Unfortunately, leadership and management is not a part of that framework, to your point, that you get advanced, you get moved in, and then nobody is integrating you or preparing you to do that. And that's what's important, is to acknowledge that and say, look, I need some assistance. I need some perspective. I need to make a call, yeah, phone a friend, whatever it is, right? And seek those solutions that are going to help your team. You're hired for your craft, but unfortunately, and you're promoted for your craft in many instances, but unfortunately, it stops there. There's so many crafts, whether it's healthcare, you know, judiciary, you name it, engineering, accounting. All crafts have common language, right? A physician can work in an OR in Portland and integrate with the staff and the language the same they would in Miami. That is not the case with leadership and management vocabulary and practices. There's nothing standard about it. And that's why I'm talking about this ecosystem approach. And I'm not saying that there's only one approach here, but if we step back and take a look, what complements each other well? Because one of the things I observe is that there's stuff that I do in organizations that I have to untalk the people out of from what they heard from other people. And that's a challenge, in my opinion, from a leadership perspective, that we're spending good money investment in one, say, methodology or framework, that now we're doing something else that's another methodology and framework that's at conflict with it, that the language does not concur, that the practices do not concur. And a great example of this is this SHRM regional conference I was at the other day. Um, one of the keynotes was talking about the importance of praise and giving praise, and and we need to give people praise, and praise can actually be, right, can be an extremely dangerous lever for organizations. That praise should be very specific and tied to very specific outcomes. But we often see in organization engagement surveys that they're not getting enough praise, or they're not getting enough recognition. And it actually has nothing to do with praise or recognition. That's just a symptom of low psychological safety and not feeling included in the organization or valued, right? But they don't have the language for it to talk about it any other way. So, another symptom is, I don't get paid enough to do this. Well, that's not actually a measure of compensation. That's a reflection of deficiencies and issues within the organization that need to be resolved. And if one person's feeling that way, it's probably a lot of people are feeling that way. And then those people are high risk to leave or stay put and withdraw, right? Quiet quitting,
Yeah.
things like that. So there's a there's a lot of need out there. There's no doubt there's a lot of need. One of the things I'm really trying to do is let's start with some standard vocabulary. Let's use some assessments to standardize our base. Let's protect some language. That's why in the book we talk about motivation in a very specific way, because it really pushes back on what people like to think motivation is. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just if we have a room of 40 people, we have 40 different definitions, and that doesn't serve us well when we're trying to determine how to support someone or, the language that a lot of people use, motivate someone, like, so when we work in the motivation space, we're the same. Here, join me on this journey. I'm asking you to set aside everything you know and pick up our vocabulary, our practice, because it's going to better serve you. And you'll see that by the end of this. Let's start with this. People can't motivate other people. Motivation's an entirely internal phenomenon. So let's start to have that conversation, unpack that, what that means, why that's true, and kind of grow our awareness around that. And then we move into what we're looking at. People often talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. They're so far away from each other on the continuum that they're not really helpful to anyone to really use, right? So a lot of people think extrinsic motivators are very important, valuable in moving people and in incentivizing people in the workplace. Regardless if you believe that or not, the reality is that most leaders don't have any mechanisms or levers to actually pull that off. So if that's your notion of what motivates people, then you're underserving them right out of the get-go, right? So we've broadened that based off the science to have four factors. And so what we're trying to do is then, to the extent that like the craft has standard language, we're trying to create standard language in the organization so that the employees we're working with, the teams we're working with, can start peer coaching each other based off of the models and systems and practices we're integrating, some of which are ours, some of which are not. They're things that we endorse so that they can keep this alive in their organization, so that they, when they troubleshoot, can say, hey, did you consider the peak performance model in troubleshooting this performance issue? Or are you using, where's their level of readiness or development as it relates to an employee on a task? So going back to your question, Carl, and I know I took us kind of on a journey there.
You're
There's
in the right
there's a lot
space.
of yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
need.
you're right
There's
at
a
home,
lot
bro.
of the key is curiosity, right? Like for me, we worked to launch our business for several years and we tried to chase, 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 chase. And what we learned was that people that aren't interested in these services, you can't convince them to be interested. So eventually what's happened is our clientele has totally shifted, but that's also due to time and referrals and reputation that we really don't approach hardly anyone now. Everyone's coming out to approach us. What can you do? We've heard you've done this, stuff like that. And those become our best partners because what they're saying is, look, I know my craft, human services or healthcare, but I need help with the people aspects of this organization. And can you help us do this? And that typically leads us into a partnership with the organization where we really get in, determine what their challenges are, move beyond the symptoms, and really work with them alongside to make inroads and headway of how we change that culture so that they have more of the right people in the same space. And actually, the people that aren't right or not fitting are self-selecting out. They're actually exiting the organization. I had this conversation once with a marketing person. He said, well, let's look at some data and stats and let's build some of your plans around your marketing plans around those. And as trainers, that's really tough stuff to get a handle on impact, right? And they said, isn't retention a good measure? I said, yeah, let's talk about retention. I have a terrible retention stat for my work with organizations. And they just looked at me like this. And I said, well, but the beauty of it is it's because they're exiting the people that don't want to be a part of the values and vision and the principles of these organizations. So in some organizations, we're turning over half the employees not because we're doing anything to push them out, but because we're building these priorities and these ambitions for the staff that align with the performance ambitions. And people that aren't interested in being a part of that are self-selecting out because they realize they can't stir the pot anymore because there's a higher level of peer-to-peer accountability, or they can't derail projects because people are looking in a different direction now. And so terrible stat, wonderful outcome. And that's really what we try to do is we want to cultivate self-leaders so that the leaders at the true leadership positions can look ahead. A quick little story. I was working with this group on goals and goal setting and goal setting strategy. And one of the managers says, Rob, I just can't even look that far away because I'm so in the weeds day to day. And I said, well, that's why we're doing this major initiative because we want to create a higher level of self-sufficiency of the team to manage and resolve their own issues without including you in that process because they have greater influence over each other when they're holding each other accountable and helping each other out. They're building a greater level of cohesion and rapport. And when that happens, it's a beautiful thing. And then all of a sudden, you as the leader look further out to where we're going, start removing those roadblocks so they don't encounter them. So I guess, a self check, if you feel like you're always looking down and you can't look ahead, it might be a reflection that your team is relying a little bit too much on you. And is that a function of the team's reliance, or is that a function of you liking to protect them and manage them and handle them and be the person that's kind of choking them and holding them in that space? Because we have to let, you talk about mama bears at times, right? That are super protective. That doesn't help a group well. Eventually those mama bears, and I know at our cabin, we have black bears and grizzlies around it. They're with that mom for a year or two, and then they're pushing them off, right? And so we need those mama bears and papa bears in the workplace to be doing the same thing as creating that distance once they've learned how to feed, once they've learned how to, forage, things like that. And so those teams can lead themselves, and the leader could actually have fun, peace, not be pissed off at the end of the day because their team is, under capable because they've created the conditions to make them under capable. I think I'm
That's
done. That was enough for me. Like, I think
no,
that
you're
was like
good.
12 minutes.
No, look, I podcast with Carl. You're fine. You're fine. So one of the things I like, a couple of things were coming to mind as I was listening to you, which I'm Rob, we might be best friends now. Sorry, Carl, you're out. I got a new bestie. Um, he's muted. Good.
Yeah, yeah.
So
She did it on. She muted me. Oh, go ahead.
yes,
Yeah.
one of my first thoughts is a phrase when we were talking about the retention: stay in joy or leave in peace. Like this is one of my favorite phrases for people to really reflect on. If you can't get on board with that collective vision, if you're not ready to contribute to that purpose or whatever it is, the goals, that's okay. You don't have to. You just don't get to stay working there. You have to find something else to do or find something you're more aligned with or something that you can be in line with the strategy or the vision. So stay in joy or leave in peace, right? There's not a third option here. That's one of my favorite things. But what you were saying, the last part of it is another coaching question I really, really enjoy. And that is asking leaders, are you looking to build capacity or dependency?
Great one.
Right? Do you want to build capacity or dependency? And so I let them decide, right? They can maybe even choose something else. But if you're looking to build capacity, you've got to teach and show and coach and then step back, allow for some mistakes, allow for some learning, allow for the development of wisdom. But if you are protecting the mama bear or the papa bear, whatever you want to call it, where you are shielding people from accountability, you are basically making them dependent on you. You can't go on vacation without having your phone right next to you. You're worried about it all. Like, who wants to live like that? Well, some people do. I'm not judging. Some people want to live like that, and that's okay. But for the most part, almost every leader I've talked to says, I want to build capacity. Great. I love to hear that. And how do we now shift your behaviors to give people both clarity in expectation, clarity in purpose, clarity in culture, and give them a little bit of that autonomy to be able to bring that to life with all of their skills and gifts and strengths that why you hired them.
Yeah.
But if you have to manage every detail of everything and have to be involved in, then I'm really kind of questioning, why did you get into leadership? If the nuts and bolts is what brings you to life, then stay there, because it's a different skill set, completely different skill set, and you have to let go of some of your control, and that's okay. It's It's
Yeah.
good.
And and that
It's wonderful.
and that's a challenge. I mean, why do people get into leadership? I mean, some people get into leadership because they really want to help transform an organization. Some folks get into leadership because that's where the money is, or just even their own idea of that traditional idea of ambition. All right, baby boomers, older Gen Xers, the idea of upward mobility was the definition of ambition back then, right? That's how we, you know, measured ourselves up against other people, right? And so just having that recognition of, why they do it. Some organizations, they give somebody a raise and a title bump just to keep them, right? And so, like you mentioned, the skill set, 80% of people that are promoted are based off of the skill in their previous job. So that doesn't mean you being the best accountant means you automatically can manage 10 accountants with their own lives and goals and motivations, right?
Yeah.
And that's so vital. And then talking about the idea of praise, so much praise is performative, right?
Mhm.
And actually, if you use it performatively with somebody who actually looks for genuine feedback, it can actually be a trigger. I mean, just see Tiff's face when I call her a rock star, right?
Oh,
She,
it's the best way to get on my bad side. Call me a rock star. I'm like, I'm not in a band and I've never been on tour. I'm not a rock star.
right? But, but some people, they'll want to know, what am I a rock star at? Right?
Mhm.
Other people, don't. Some people need that public praise. Some people just put me in a room with you and tell me what the impact was that I did. Other people, okay, I did this right. What do I need to do better next time? Right? And so there's so many different ways to interact with people, and if you don't take the time to really know your people and just think of this is the way that I lead and people have to get behind or get left behind, it really is a challenge, like you mentioned with the autonomy. Not everyone is up for autonomy at that, for different levels of autonomy. Right? You're the mama bear, and then what happens when the mama bear is gone? Mama bear has to turn into coach, right? And so let's talk about how you're feeling, right? And then that person who can be the mentor can give you tips when you need them. And then, hey, everything's good. Let's just touch base every now and then just to make sure that, your road is smooth and I can remove some barriers. But, there's so many different variables, like you mentioned. And if people just go about it with one playbook, they're really doing themselves a disservice and their staff a disservice. It's such a challenge.
I want to kind of go back almost full circle because what you were just saying there, Carl, about praise and what you said, Rob, about community. I think that's maybe a bit of the magic sauce here, where if we're really trying to build these communities, micro communities within our organization, then that praise or that feedback, that positive feedback, has to be some type of reinforcement of those community-based behaviors. So
Yeah.
I don't want to be like, Carl, you really nailed that project. You're a rock star. It has to be, Carl, this was great work. And here's how it's helping our team. And here's how it's helping our organization. And here's how it's helping our clients. And I really appreciate that energy, even when people get it wrong. I can see that you had this outcome, and it didn't pan out the way that we intended. But I really love that you were able to take initiative. And here are the things that went well. Like, what would we do differently next time, or how could we approach this? But I really appreciate that you were willing to try something new, even if it wasn't a winner, to really celebrate those behaviors that are in line with whatever the collective nature of our teams are. Otherwise, if we're saying show initiative, and then you show initiative and they're like, who told you could do that? It's very contradictory. And then we have people who give up. The quiet quitting, as Rob said earlier, the quiet quitting.
So a couple thoughts that relate to that. I think about praise and feedback. Is that what's the impetus behind it, or what's the purpose behind it on the receiving end? Is it for ego, or is it for alignment? Right? Two very important factors there to consider, because the answer to that question is relative to who it's going to best serve, right? And so I think that's a really important factor when we're having these conversations as it relates to moving people in that right direction. Because if it's for alignment, it's very community centric in many instances. And when you have community centric people, that's what they want to know is what I'm doing sufficient and aligned with what, not just what's expected of me, but what this group needs. But the interesting thing is, if you mentioned it, and I don't remember what the exact word was, just a moment ago, like when you said, "Oh, demonstrate some," it was like independence, or go out and do something for us, or do
initiative.
initiative, right? But
Yeah.
there you go, is another term that we might not have the same definition of, right? An initiative in this one group might look something different than initiative someone learned somewhere else. And I was like, wait, that's not what I meant. I meant bring us along with you when you do that. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize that, because the last time I got in trouble in my last organization, I got in trouble for not just putting myself out there and doing it. Anyway, so it's just complicated, right? So this conference that I was speaking at, like I mentioned last week, where we talked about praise, we talked about autonomy, we talked about the problem with delegation, talked about the benefits of micromanagement, all these things that are like, what are you talking about? These are all the opposite of everything I ever heard. I always came back to, it depends. It really depends. There's no absolutes. It is easier, as both of you have pointed to work from a really flat system that's very consistent with everyone. But because it's easy, you don't have to think about it. In some instances, it's automatic, autonomic. But those really strong leaders know how to navigate that space and do the dance, right? And to show up for the people. If needs something different than Carl, that might actually change tomorrow. And I'll just, because I built the relationship on the front end, I have a little bit more flexibility and grace if I don't support Tiff in the way she needs to be supported today, because things are changing in her life. But she also knows that I got her back, and, my intention is honorable, not to hurt, even though some of the communication that might occur, because that's what happens in feedback, right? Feedback is, we know in many instances where we made those mistakes, yet we still don't want to hear it, right? It's a weird type of mix there. But if we have a relationship, if we have community, if we have rapport, if we have trust, like, oh, Rob's telling me this because it's in my best interest.
Right.
Doesn't mean it doesn't sting, but it sure passes over a lot quicker, doesn't it?
And that's
No, go ahead. I was about to go hallelujah. That's where I was going with that.
No, and you're right. I mean, totally, just to piggyback off that, I mean, just that idea of alignment you keep talking about, praise and feedback can be part of the holistic nature of alignment, right? It doesn't have to be forced. It's not a box to check off, right? And so, I mean, we know the Lazada line 3-to-1, and Harvard Business Review, high performing organizations 6-to-1 positive interactions but those positive interactions don't have to be keep up the good work, good job on that report, you're a rock star, sorry Tiff. And just that idea of how was your weekend, right? You're gonna go watch that new Leonardo DiCaprio movie or whatever else it is, right? That is not necessarily work related, like you mentioned. When we get into some more non-work related ideas that create maybe a little more intimate knowledge of each other without prying, that really adds to that holistic nature where it's not even just the praise or feedback you're getting from your leaders, you're also getting it from your peers, and it's recognized as part of the process of our culture, right? And so, and I saw it when one organization I worked for, when I first came in, one of the things they asked for was a non-monetary recognition program. So no bonuses. It wasn't about bonuses or anything or raises. It was just recognition for working with each other. And this was a bunch of financial service folks in the middle of the pandemic. I'm not the pandemic, in the middle of the recession, right? So we created a program where they could recognize each other for working with each other. And they sent a card connected to one of the 6 organizational values. And it was sent to them and to their manager. And it was the most popular recognition program we had, where they were just going back and forth. And usually the people that responded to the person who sent the card was the manager. Thank you for recognizing my staff. They work really hard, which was an extra kudo for that staff member. It really turned into a holistic idea where we all had each other's back. And it wasn't sniping, and it wasn't about, hey, you treated me different than you treated Tiff, even though Tiff needed that extra, time, or Carl needed to be on mute, whatever it is, right? We have that understanding of each other. Okay, well, yeah, he might have treated Tiff different, but it's because Tiff had different needs. So I'm okay with that because I know how he treats me. And I think that's, to me, that's what's the heart of the type of culture that is, for me, is ideal. And
Yeah.
what I think, when we start pulling for each other, like you mentioned, just even looking at Lencioni's pyramid, right? There's trust, and then managing conflict. And when we can manage conflict, and when we know we have each other's best interest in mind, then we can commit to each other and be accountable to each other's work, and production happens, right? And so it's just establishing those two bottom pyramid pillars, right? The trust and managing conflict. And I think the more that you have regular conversations with folks and regular feedback, the less it's conflict, and the more
Yeah.
it's, hey, I'm getting information, right?
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Exactly.
With you with the trust. So I was hallelujah earlier because working in a people-centered business, and again, unless you work all by yourself writing code and never talk to people ever, you have to have some people skills. And for me, as personally, some of my highest values is integrity and authenticity, and people get that from me right away because I'm who I am. I will mold to the environment as necessary, but I really value authenticity and people being who they are. I'm going to welcome you and create that belonging however you show up, right? And so that's important to me. So where I in a workplace struggle, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is that when people try to create that false sense of connection, or the false collaboration where it's not really collaborative, it's competitive, and you can see that there's an ulterior motive. And I want to be generous in my assumptions of others, but then when you see patterns of behavior, like, hold on, wait a minute, this person is so nice when we have our little chit chats in the break room, but that little, per my last email, felt a little snarky. So what's the real intention behind it? And then you go and say, hey, what was the intention behind that email? And they're like, oh my God, I didn't know. It's like, it's a hard, that human condition, to keep that trust and keep that connection together, especially when that common purpose is not discussed, and we don't have those challenging conversations, or we don't feel comfortable to have those challenging conversations with each other to say, can we talk, without it being a competition, without it being a who's going to win, right? Because when we win or lose, everybody loses if one person has to win. And when we get into that collective space, we win when we can come to common ground. And I don't know. I haven't worked in a business like that in a long time where we have that common ground, and it's really, really difficult because I crave it. I crave it. I love to work with people who we can have honest, authentic, genuine conversations, and we know everybody's coming from the right place. And if I had one wish, I would wish for that. That's it.
Well, I think we've made everything so transactional in many
Yeah.
instances, right? And so we're not seeing each other in the same space on the same timeline. And there's a lot of complicating factors, one of which is self-talk and talk with people around us about, this concept of, oh, I'm so busy. And you hear this a lot from leaders. Oh, I'm so busy. And not even the leaders are saying, oh, I'm so busy. We know in many instances they are, but they're talking about, oh, their staff just can't seem to get these deadlines or get this done. And they're so busy, yet they're having these small-sided conversations, or they're hanging out and hovering over other people's desks, and that doesn't mean we don't want community. Community is really important, as we've established, in interaction, but some of that talk that starts as one person complaining becomes a lot of self-talk And it's kind of like ruminating, right? You start building these deeply rooted tendencies and neural pathways so that it's hard to leave and exit out of that practice or that ideation. And and that's one of the things we're seeing is really hurting organizations, at least in my opinion, is that we have to pull it back and have some conversations. And we do that. We do some real kind of facilitative conversations around that. But if it isn't for sometimes that leader dropping the ball though afterwards, right? Like I remember really being brought in to recast how this is going to happen, occur with a group. They need to have a little bit of a reckoning with each other and some agreements and rules of engagement. And we established all this. And even to the point of, me saying, you should expect after today that you'll all be approaching this all a little bit differently with each other, as well as the leader who I knew was low confrontation, low feedback, low accountability, should now start to, he's going to try his best. She's going to try her best. It might sound funny. It might stumble, but give them grace because they're trying to do their best as a part of this overall agreement. And then they just leave and nothing changes, right? And that's not always the case. We have other groups that really leverage that and move forward with that. But unfortunately, at times it's, they commit to it, but they don't live in according of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had a group I worked with years ago that their whole executive team had conflict, and it was apparent in the way that it trickled down into their workplace. And so when they initially asked me to come in and consult, I was like, well, what's going on? And so let's talk to some people. And it was like, well, our managers do this, and they talk to each other, and we bypass. So as I came in, I was asking the executives, so tell me about the challenges that you're seeing and what you're hoping for and what you want to change. And they were, the staff needs to do this and the staff needs to do that. And so I'm tricky. I'm a tricky. So I said, okay, let's establish a code of conduct for your staff. Okay. And I had already known, I had some background information about who in this executive team got along and who didn't get along. And so over the period, I think of 6 months, I would come in once a month and I would pair them up, kept mixing up. This is going to be your partner for the next month. Come back to that code of conduct. Remember, initiative, define these words. Don't just put buzzwords on here, but really define what they look like in action. Work with each other, come to some agreements. So for 6 months, we worked on this code of conduct, and we'd come back and we talk about it and what did you agree on? What did you disagree on? So at the very last one, I said, okay, do we all agree this code of conduct is ready for the staff? We're ready to roll it out. They're like, yeah. I said, it's not for them. It's for you. So this code of conduct is not for your staff. This code of conduct is for you. If you want to see this from your staff, you first. So all of the things that you've agreed to or that you're expecting from the people that report to you, you have to be willing to model this behavior. If not, you're wasting everybody's time. Oh, they were so pissed at me. They were so pissed.
Bait and switch.
It was the bait and switch, but I'm tricky. I tell you, I'm tricky. It's much easier to talk about other people than worry about yourself. And so, but I also will say months after that, I would get some handwritten notes from members of that team saying it changed everything for them. And so I was really excited about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So thinking about all of that and the challenges of leadership and really the expectations. I mean, we should hold our leaders to a high level of expectation, and we should also expect that they may have a road to get there, but that's okay. That's just like with new hires, learning the culture, and sometimes new leaders or leaders in new roles have to learn, how things work. And talking about reaching out for help, like I said, a lot of leaders, they feel like I can't reach out for help because I was given this role and expected. And if they do reach out for help, what, you don't know this, right? How long have you been here, right? All that judgmental stuff. And so just thinking about the role that a healthy HR department can fill to really help leaders get a grasp on where they're going and, what are some of the dynamics that you're seeing, that a healthy HR department can do to help augment um, and really complement a leader in getting the most out of their teams.
That's a tough one because most HR departments we work with are pretty small, right? Like in general, like even a big organization might only have a handful of people, and a lot of organizations have one or two people. And HR has an interesting through the education process, people really kind of identify more with the people side or the infrastructure system side, right? And
HRIS and everything. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
benefits policy, and they're doing it for the
Mhm.
people, but also some people just find more comfort in certain systems and certain approaches versus more comfort in the people. And sometimes there's conflict because the job of the HR office or division or whatever it is might be organization first, people second, right? So there's a lot of variables there. But I think what's really important is for the HR person or group or team to really see their opportunity as facilitative. It doesn't work out well when HR has to be the development solution for everyone because they don't necessarily have the backbone or the wheelhouse or the expertise to do that. And that's one of the things I see, and I'm preparing an article right now that relates to, you might have correct instructional design experts, but where are they getting their leadership development content from? And is it timely? Is it relevant? Is it evidence based? And so you have these like directives coming from this executive level onto these other people that have technical skills in certain areas, but they might not have the subject matter expertise in the area that we're looking to prepare people for, right? Not tasks, human stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I really think it's important for that HR division to be facilitative in nature, ask questions, create opportunities for people to come together to explore opportunities, deficiencies, needs in a very safe environment, and that the HR division is a representative of the organization that's going to help source and find solutions for those asks, those requests, those needs, right? I don't expect the HR people to have those expertise. I expect that once again, it's like the leader that doesn't know the answer to the question. The best answer to the question is that I don't know. I will get you the information. I'll get back to you
Yeah.
within 24 hours. The same thing's true
Right.
for that group, that unless it's in your wheelhouse, take some time, take pause and report back. Like find better information that's going to help the group. You might be able to do it. You might not be able to do it. You might need to vet some people to determine what the solutions might look like. But be a resource in the space outside of the policy and benefits and HRIS and pieces like that. So because that's what people need. And like I said, so some people are doing it very well. Some people are generalists in every aspect of the word. So they're not well equipped to be at a kind of that front end of where we need to go with these things, that we need to leverage some people in our networks, in our conference groups, things like that to help us out. So and it's always a challenge because it's a small group with a big, difficult marching order, right? Their tasks are really significant and they're responsible for a lot. And it's a really high stakes position with low reward in many instances. They often deal with people like, we need to fire Tiff now because she's blah, 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 blah. And it's like, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. How long has this been going on? It's been like this for 2 years now. Well, okay, whoa.
Where's documentation?
Yeah. So they're just in a rough spot that it was really heartwarming to see them all come together last week in Anchorage. There's about 450 of them together because they're with their people in their community and the people that speak the same language and can, they could rely on each other for the stories and the challenges they're experiencing. And so it's a tough position to be in, and they have great people doing great work, but in many instances they're under-resourced, they're understaffed, and 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 for some of them, or a lot of them, they're afraid. Like they're afraid that if they don't have the answers or the solutions, the leadership's going to look elsewhere.
And you like it sparks something for me right now because conferences are such a good way for people to connect from different positions, or I mean, maybe similar positions, but different organizations where they get to
Mhm,
come and talk and compare notes. This is also one piece that I would love to see grow in the leadership space is not just having these conferences, but even within organizations for leaders within the organization to communicate with each other and to build
mhm,
community with each other.
mhm,
And this is one of the challenges I see, at least in our area, is that a lot of times leaders develop that community or that culture within their team of the people that they support or the people who are subordinate to them, but they don't necessarily participate in a all leadership level to have common language. And so it becomes really lonely.
yeah,
And we're missing opportunities. And again, as a leadership coach, it's very lucrative for me, but it's not in the goal to not have people communicate with each other that oftentimes are experiencing some of the same challenges, and they can talk with each other and find solutions together using some of that common language, building that culture up even more if they
mhm,
can really learn to it's not a contest of who's the best leader. Let's find out how to lead together
yeah.
and really create a place where people want to come here and do their best work. And
To me,
we serve that purpose.
that's part of a mindset, right? Like, so the organization, the leadership has to demonstrate their commitment to ulterior paths forward for solutions, right? And so, in one instance, I'm working, not one instance, in many instances, but at one extent, working with HR to start hosting these ongoing development and conversation things to start because their leadership believes in it and buys into it, right? So that they could start to normalize those behaviors, generate interest, pieces like that. But, you've probably been in these situations, and I always find them a little awkward. I don't mind going in and trying to do the best I can and really helping them. But when the executive branch or executive branch, that sounds pretty like US Congress level. But when the executive leadership are like, no, 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 this isn't for us. This is for these people, or this division could broker it themselves and they need the
Mhm.
help. Like there's now a disconnect because what we're trying to do is language systems frameworks that now they don't even know about. They're clearly
Mhm.
not interested in being a part of. And so what kind of subconscious, unconscious kind of messaging is that also to people in the system that, hey, our CEO is not here or not in this for part of it, or they never went through this, but we're going
Yeah.
through it. And so when we work with organizations, we often work with them in terms of, I call it like the top crust, that executive crust. And we start doing our foundational stuff. And our strategy is called drips over time, that we're revisiting material over time. And so we'll get them squared away on a lot of the curriculum, the framework, the practices. And because resources aren't unlimited, now we jump into different divisions or groups that are either nearly high performing and just need that bump, or really struggling and deficient that need to be to some extent rescued and retooled, right? And so then we resource in those columns, and then there's an integration that occurs with respect to that leadership because it's important. And we'll even go from leadership to board level development also as a part of it, because we want the board to have an appreciation so that that leader feels supported of these invests that they're doing for the people. And in many instances, the board's right on board with that because they believe in it. They recognize it from their own experiences in their own life that we need to do it. Unfortunately, sometimes leaders are afraid to bring them in and they're scared, just as employees are scared to ask their leaders, CEOs in some instances, especially in the nonprofit world, right?
Mhm.
They're nervous to engage the board for these development things because they are worried about the perceptions of not knowing what's going on or there's problems. But the board's fully
Yeah.
aware of that this is a great opportunity to build capacity. Look, we just went full circle. We brought it all the way back to capacity.
I love it. See,
Because
we're
that's what
all
it's
over
all
the
about.
place. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're all over the place,
Yeah.
and we end up right where we need to be.
Yeah. So to close, and we appreciate you taking the time, Rob. It's definitely
Yeah,
been a
thanks for the
Been
pleasure.
a
opportunity.
pleasure. This is the
Of
best
course.
Friday I've had all week.
Oh,
Yeah.
good, good.
Excuse me. We like to end our interviews and just even our episodes with a top five.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
And so, just to no, I'm not going to ask him what's the top five Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops he's ever been to, because he's a fly fisherman, and his wife is an emotional intelligence expert, Tiff. So
oh,
she's going to be joining us soon as well. So I just
I
need to
can't
put that
wait.
formal invite out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what would you consider? Just I don't want to say top five resources, but what are five resources if we were to give people
Yeesh.
your five resources to create a healthy platform to start this capacity building for your organization?
Um, oof. So I want to really get self-promoted here because some of the stuff that I've built and done, I think move us in a direction that's a little different, right? And Tiff, you kind of alluded to this, that you were on the website and you saw some of the blogs there. And the blogs cover all sorts of mainstream popular things, such as feedback, accountability, ones like, is this a capital G grievance or is this lowercase g grievance, right? Autonomy, delegation, but in a light that's very different than what we've often been told and practiced and taught. And so I think if you visit, our website, Black River, the letter P for performance, letter M for management.com/blogs, these are quick, easy, 600 to 1100 word science-based perspectives that are somewhat contrarian, that I think those are helpful for people to start to wrap their minds around, because I think people's belief and assumptions and following of leadership is really based on what they've been exposed to in the past. And right, wrong, or indifferent, they don't have a reference point to compare it to. They know they can compare good and positive to negative and uncomfortable experiences. They can do that well, right? But they also don't know what else is out there and what resonates and what's their truth. So that's a good resource. If you like what we talked about, check out our podcasts. We have I think probably over 200 on our website, whether they're hosted by other people or Angie ran a whole bunch, hosted herself. But also the Science of Strategy and Soul book you mentioned on the front end, that's available for free on the website. It's not super detailed, but it shows our models, has a case study for each model, has things to avoid, common pitfalls, because once again, we're shifting people away from what they've often been told on how to do things, which is incongruent or inaccurate according to the most current sciences. So we're trying to create systems so that you don't need the education, you don't need the background, that if you follow the framework, you're honoring kind of the psychology of behavior of the people we're working with. Other things, just get out there and be curious and talk to people and, do something different and be a student. And if you're always a leader, if you're always in charge, stop driving and sit in the passenger seat, right? So learn what it's like to be a learner. Again, be a student. We make a point of that often in our life, our family. Took the whole family, got certified in scuba. We were the students once
Cool.
again, as opposed to being the experts, right? And so just you learn how to teach and train better when you remember what it's like to be a learner. And so, yeah. And then I don't know, the last thing, I love travel. And I think travel really shifts your perspectives and beliefs, whether that's domestic travel or international travel, and get out there and see things and experience things, because it's amazing what we learn from other people that are walking in a different set of shoes than ours.
All of the above. All of the above. That's so exciting.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. It's
yeah,
been an honor and a pleasure.
absolutely. Next time you travel to California, just let us know. Maybe we can do something live. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of people that are requesting us up there, so I think it'd be fun to carve out some time and do a little bit of a tour to see some friends, hang out with some cool people and adventure and explore.
Well, I
Right
would
on.
just say, FYI, San Felipe, Mexico has fabulous scuba. Just for the record,
Awesome.
we are the world's aquarium. We have a very unique ecosystem. Just saying, throwing it out there.
If that invite's open, Tiff,
It
I'll
is.
call you on that because we spend a lot of time in Mexico. Because it's so close, it's easy to get to for us, right?
Yeah.
Even, for you, it's nothing, but for us, it's still easy.
Yeah.
And that's part of where we find our peace and our rejuvenation.
Same. Same. All of that. Yes. The
It's
invitation is open.
Awesome. Thank you.
it's like the end of Shawshank Redemption. So, yeah, absolutely. With some cool beer bars. So, yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, Rob. Definitely appreciate it, folks. Yeah, all the resources that he talked about, his website, and the links to the blogs and the book will be in the show notes. And we really do appreciate you being here. And thanks for listening, folks. And until next time, I'm Carl,
I'm Tiff, and that's Rob.
and that's Rob, and we're keeping it real.
We are.